Welcome to this video article, which is the first in a look at the first Harry Potter film and analysing it through the lens of the hero's journey. Before we get started, I've called it the first Harry Potter film because here in the UK we call it Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but in the US and other territories it's called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So by saying first Harry Potter film, we're all on the same page. So first thing to know is the hero's journey is a story model. It's not the only story model out there. There are plenty of story models. I can think of 10 off the top of my head. I've talked about some of them in some of my other videos. No doubt we'll talk about other story models in the future as well. I use the term hero's journey as shorthand for Chris Vogler's interpretation of Joseph Campbell's monomyth. You can find, so Chris Vogler, the book to read is called The Writer's Journey, and Joseph Campbell wrote a book in 1947, I think, called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Joseph Campbell, in case you don't know, was what's known as a comparative mythologist, and his book was about highlighting all of the elements that he found were consistent across different cultures in their myths and stories. And then I think he used the term the monomyth as well. But Campbell was not a story structure person or a screenwriter or a writer of fiction. And he codified his monomyth for scholarly mythology, or as the underpinning for his scholarly mythological writings. You'll find lots of material that he wrote on various facets of heroes and myths, if you want to go deeper into it. But when I use the term hero's journey, I'm talking about Chris Vogler's 12-step interpretation and of Campbell's work, and not Campbell's work per se. A quick caveat before we really start getting into the analysis: there's going to be tons of spoilers, not just for this film, but for the Harry Potter sequence as a whole. And I've chosen this as the first long-form analysis for plenty of reasons. Although it's a children's film, the storytelling is very nuanced in terms of things like foreshadowing, setting things up that you don't really understand their significance until story 2 or story 5 or story 7, when everything ties together. I mean, there are things that just seem fun and interesting in the first film, but when we get further down the line in the sequence, have much more relevance. So they were all obviously planned in great detail ahead, and how it all hangs together and comes to a conclusion is really worth studying. Excellent piece of storytelling over a number of different stories. And I thought I would get this out there and done because we are now in June 2025, halfway through June actually, and at some stage there is going to be the HBO are filming the TV series version of the first Harry Potter book. So I wanted to get this out there, and then when that comes out I'll be able to see what they've done, what they've changed, how the extra, I believe there's going to be 10 episodes in that first season of the revamp of Harry Potter, and it'll be interesting to see what they've done to change the story. Caveat 2. The hero's journey's strength is structuring a solid story spine. What that means is you can use the hero's journey to give you a really great overview of a story that you want to tell, but it'll be missing some of the detail that you need, where if you were actually writing, you'd go, well, how do I get from this point in the hero's journey to this point? And there's not a lot of guidance to connect some of the points up. That's something I'm working on to create my own hybrid story model. We may get to that here, as in these video articles on YouTube. We may not. It may be saved for my writing vault. More on that later. So let's dive in. So Unusually for a contemporary story, there is a prologue before we get and look at the first step of the hero's journey, which is the ordinary world. And in this prologue, the special world comes to the ordinary world. And the ordinary world is going to be represented by Harry living with his aunt and uncle, the Dursleys, in Privet Drive. But in this prologue, we find out that something momentous has happened, and there's stuff going on that is not that basically foreshadows the magic and the witchcraft and the wizardry that's coming later on in this story. Dumbledore dims the street lights. McGonagall shapeshifts from a cat into her human form, and Hagrid arrives with baby Harry on a flying motorcycle. They foreshadow as well that the Dursleys, the people who's just a baby, and so we don't know at this point what's actually happened, but it's something in the story world that's obviously very momentous. And it's, of course, we all know, if you've seen the film, that Voldemort tried to kill Harry, and Voldemort has died and has been banished to a wraith form, although people don't know that yet. But the Dursleys, where Harry's going to live, are terrible humans, or muggles, as McGonagall calls them. But Dumbledore says they're the only family Harry has. And that's an important line of dialogue, because there's several themes that run through this story and also all of the Harry Potter stories. And one of them is the importance of family and love and all of the emotions that you associate with families and stuff. And even in this first prologue scene, we get a line of dialogue that will reinterpret either when we watch the film a second time or when we've seen various events later on in the story. So we go from that prologue, we go to the ordinary world. And Harry's ordinary world, as I've said, is life with the Dursleys. And he lives in a cupboard under the stairs, and we open up with Dudley running down to open all his presents because it's his birthday, stamping on the stairs to wake Harry up, and then Harry is treated like a servant, and he's cooking bacon and getting coffee and doing breakfast, and he's not really treated as like he's part of the family. And we see Dudley is a spoiled brat, and his parents pander to his every whim. Not a very pleasant character, not a great place for Harry to live. While we're in the ordinary world, and what's interesting to note about the Harry Potter, certainly this film, and it'll be interesting to see when I analyse later films in the sequence, is that all of the events are treated as like mini sequences, and the ordinary world is no different in that respect. So we open up with Harry helping to get Dudley's breakfast ready, and breakfast for his uncle and his aunt. And then from there, we seek to the zoo, where they're going to the zoo for Dudley's birthday treat. Now, what's interesting is that Harry's uncle tells him no funny business, but when they get to the zoo, Dudley's disappointed because the boa constrictor's not doing anything exciting, and Harry finds that he can talk to the boa constrictor. So again, we've got an inkling that something's different here about Harry, and this is not a story that's set in a world that we live in. It's a slightly alternate reality where obviously this magic can take place, and at this point we don't know the rules of the magic, and then the snake starts moving around and Dudley gets interested, but somehow the glass disappears, the snake escapes, and Dudley then gets trapped in the snake enclosure, and the glass comes back, and the Dursleys have to get the zoo staff to come and free Dudley. And there's a telling exchange between Uncle Vernon and Harry, and he asks him what happened. Harry said he didn't know. it was like magic or something, and he looks at Harry and said, "There's no such thing as magic," and again, this is one of those lines that we'll reevaluate when we learn more later on in the stories. Second stage of the hero's journey is the call to adventure. This is probably the shortest sequence hero's journey stage in the film. Basically, an owl delivers a letter, and the owl is displaying the archetype of the herald, delivering a message. And that letter is a Harry's invitation to Hogwarts. And Harry has no idea what Hogwarts School of Wizardry and Witchcraft is. I think it's the other way around, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, because the Dursleys have kept him in the dark. He thinks his parents were killed in a motorcycle crash. He doesn't know anything about his past. He doesn't know anything about his connection to the wizarding world. So the call to adventure is there. Harry gets the letter. Before he can open it, Uncle Vernon takes it off him and tears it up. The third stage of the hero's journey, you often actually don't see this stage in many stories, but what's unusual about Harry Potter in terms of looking via the lens of the hero's journey is that there's quite an extended refusal of the call sequence, but the call, which is usually refused by the hero, something happens and he gets his call to adventure and he either doesn't have the courage or is not ready. Think of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. He can't go off with Obi-Wan Kenobi because he's got to help his uncle and aunt get the crops in. And notice another thing there, connection there between Luke and Harry. They're both orphans. It's a common thing in hero myths that the hero is an orphan and doesn't know who he actually is. Just an aside there. In this specific story, the people who do the refusing of the call is the Dursleys, and what they do is they tear up the letters, they burn letters, they throw them in the fireplace because the hundreds of owls deliver hundreds of letters. Uncle Vernon nails the letterbox shut, and then they come down the chimney, and eventually Uncle Vernon takes the Dursleys and Harry away from Privet Drive, and they go to a deserted lighthouse. And Harry's rescued from this scenario by the arrival of Hagrid, who comes to find out why he's not responded to his letters and what's going on. And there's this is a scene where we get the reveal that Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia have lied to Harry about his parents' death, and they told him that they were killed in a car accident or a motorcycle accident, but they weren't, and Hagrid is not very happy, to say the least. Anyway, that Hagrid taking Harry away from the Dursleys on his motorbike concludes the refusal of the call sequence, and then we can then move to the next stage of the hero's journey, which is meeting with the mentor. Now, Harry has multiple mentors over the course of the series, and he also plays the archetype of the mentor himself to other students in later films, notably when he's training some of the younger students in spells that they can use to fight against Voldemort's cronies, to defend themselves against Voldemort's cronies. So the mentor role shifts throughout the course of the films and the stories. And overall, if you were looking at Harry's journey as an arc that covers all 7 books or all 8 films, then the overall mentor is Dumbledore. And even in the last book, after Dumbledore's died, he still serves as a mentor. There's a really interesting scene right towards the climax of the last film, the last book. But in the first film, the mentor figure for Harry really is Hagrid. And Hagrid takes Harry to Diagon Alley to pick up what he'll need for school. This sequence is like a mini movie on its own, and there's several interesting things that happen that affect various elements of the plot and the story, not just in the rest of this film, but in other films in the series. First, Harry's disorientated when he gets to Diagon Alley. Common thing in Hero's Journey stories when you cross a threshold is to experience disorientation. Diagon Alley, by the way, serves as a halfway house between the ordinary world, which for Harry is the Dursleys, and the special world, which is Hogwarts. And you'll see it fulfill that role in the next film too. So it's kind of like a place which touches both the ordinary world where you or I live, where there's no magic, and the special world of Hogwarts. Harry goes into the Leaky Cauldron and he finds out he's infamous. People see the scar on his forehead and someone says it's Harry Potter, and the place goes quiet. People want to shake his hand. And it's a really interesting little story point there, because then they're introduced to Professor Quirrell, and he doesn't want to shake Harry's hand. A little bit of very subtle foreshadowing there for later on in the film. 3 more important clues in this stage. Hagrid has to get something from the Vault 713 in Gringotts, and there has been an attempted burglary. We'll find out that information later on in the story. And we find out that the thing that Hagrid gets from Vault 713, which is Dumbledore's vault, is the Philosopher's Stone. Harry has to go and get a wand, and he goes to Ollivander's wand shop, and Ollivander gives him a wand that's the twin of Voldemort's, only Ollivander doesn't refer to Voldemort by name. He calls him He Who Shall Not Be Named. And then Hagrid and Harry sit down, and Hagrid tells Harry the story of the scar on his head, and Harry has guessed that Voldemort killed his parents, doesn't know the full story, but Hagrid fills him in on all that detail, and Harry gets that reveal of who he is, why everyone in the wizarding world knows his name, and what happened to his parents. Although at this point he doesn't know exactly why Voldemort trying to kill him backfired on Voldemort and left him with a scar but killed Voldemort. And also, we don't know that the reason Harry can speak in Parseltongue and speak with the snakes, something that crops up right throughout all of the films, is because there's a little bit of Voldemort inside Harry's head, which is why he gets headaches, which is the final Horcrux that has to be killed, or one of the final Horcruxes, before Voldemort can be destroyed at the end of the 8-film sequence. I said there were going to be spoilers. No way of analysing any film without giving spoilers. And with the Harry Potter films, they're very eloquently done in the sense that at the start, although there are things that are scary and especially for the intended target audience, we don't know the things that are going to be important later on down the line in like film 7, film 8. So it's very interesting watching all of the films quite close together and seeing all these little ideas and story seeds that are planted in one film that pay off in the next, or pay off two films down the line, or pay off 6 films down the line. Very interesting storytelling going on in terms of world building and foreshadowing. So from Diagon Alley, Hagrid then drops Harry off at King's Cross to get the train to Hogwarts. That will be the next sequence in the hero's journey, which is crossing the first threshold, and we'll pick that up in the next episode. So we'll pick that up, and we'll do the next 3 or 4 steps as well in part 2. And hopefully I'll finish the hero's journey in part 2, and then we can look at some writing lessons, because there are some interesting things that are worth pointing out just from the first film that you could perhaps apply to the writing of the stories that you're currently working on. If you've got any questions about this, you can email me, paul@deliberate-practice.com. And if you are a frustrated and or aspiring fiction writer, you might want to check out my site, writing-vault.com. The full link will be in the description. This is a monthly membership. It's only $7 a month. There's lots of interesting resources for writers in there. And this will probably be the place where I collate all my investigations into creating my own long-form hybrid story structure, which combines the hero's journey and then uses that to create a solid structural story spine. And then we go down a level and fill in the details with sequences, and then we go down another level and fill in the precise details with scenes, breaking the sequences and the different types of sequences down into scenes. So you find that all there. I add new stuff nearly every day of the week. So check that out, and I will catch you in part 2.